The hunt begins. The dense, mist-covered jungle was silent. Too silent. Clyra, the elite alien huntress, moved carefully, her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. Her armor, black as the void, blended with the shadows, and her twin energy blades hummed softly at her sides. She had hunted many creatures across the galaxy, but this mission was different. Her people believed that humans were long extinct. Stories spoke of them as legends, dangerous, cunning, and nearly impossible to kill. They were the only species to ever challenge the galactic dominion. But that was centuries ago. No human had been seen in over 300 years. Yet the Council had received strange signals from this forgotten planet. A distress beacon encoded in an ancient human frequency. It made no sense. If humans were gone, who sent it? Zira was here to find out. And if somehow a human had survived, she would hunt it down. She stepped forward, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The air smelled of rain and decay. Her visor displayed the environment in bright green outlines, mapping every tree, rock, and movement. Still, something felt off. A shiver ran down her spine. She was being watched. She turned sharply, scanning the treetops. Nothing. But Syra trusted her instincts. The best hunters did. Then, a sound, a small rustle of leaves. Not the wind. Something, or someone, was here. She knelt, touching the ground. Tracks. Fresh ones. The shape, the weight distribution. Humanoid. She frowned. It couldn't be. A faint clicking noise reached her ears. Zyra barely had time to react. She jumped back just as a sharp metal projectile shot past her, burying itself into a tree with a thunk. A trap. A primitive but effective one. She narrowed her eyes, scanning the area again. No sign of the attacker. Whoever they were, they knew how to hide. Impressive. But she was not easy prey. "Come out," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "Face me." Silence. Then, movement. A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping onto a thick tree branch above her. Zyra's breath caught for just a second. A man. A real, living human. He was tall, lean but strong, with dark, ragged clothing. His face was hidden under a makeshift mask of fabric and metal, but his eyes, sharp and intelligent, watched her carefully. He held a crude spear in one hand, but his stance showed experience. This was not a frightened survivor. This was a warrior. Zyra tightened her grip on her weapons. This was impossible. Humans were extinct. Weren't they? The man tilted his head slightly, as if studying her just as she was studying him. Then, without a word, he turned and vanished into the jungle. Zyra cursed under her breath. This hunt had just become interesting. The phantom fighter. The jungle was alive with whispers of the hunt. Zyra moved like a shadow, her every step precise, calculated. The human was real. Not a myth. Not an extinct relic of war. He was flesh, blood, and more importantly, dangerous. She had faced beasts with razor-sharp claws, creatures that could tear through metal, but none of them moved like him. He didn't just hide. He vanished. The memory of their brief encounter played in her mind. His stance, his eyes, sharp, aware. He had assessed her like a predator, not prey. That alone made him different from every other species she had hunted. But Sarah was not one to be outmatched. She had trained her entire life for this. She had survived wars, conquered planets, and stood undefeated. And she refused to let a mere human change that. Still, she had to be careful. The human had the advantage here. This was his land, his battlefield. She activated her visor, switching to thermal vision. The world around her lit up in waves of heat signatures, glowing red, orange, and yellow. She scanned the trees, the ground, even the thick foliage. Nothing. That was impossible. A cold realization settled in her mind. He knows how to hide from my technology. The thought sent an unfamiliar sensation through her. Excitement. Zyra was used to predictable prey. She had spent years hunting creatures that relied on instinct rather than strategy. But this human was something else entirely. He was intelligent. He was playing a game she intended to win. A deadly encounter. A sudden crackle of static in her ear broke her focus. "Zyra, report." The voice of her superior, Commander Vekran, was sharp and impatient. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "The mission is compromised. There is a survivor." Silence. Then, "Repeat that." Zyra clenched her jaw. "The human species is not extinct. I have engaged one." Another pause. This time, it was longer. "Terminated. Immediately." The order was clear. And yet, something inside her resisted. She had never questioned a command before. She had always obeyed, always executed her hunts flawlessly. But this time, she wanted to know more. Why was he here? How had he survived? What else had her people been wrong about? Before she could respond, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Her instincts screamed. She leaped to the side, just in time. A thin, deadly spear sliced past her, missing her by inches. It embedded itself in a tree with a deep, vibrating hum. She spun, raising her weapons. The jungle was still, but she knew he was there. Then, movement. From the treetops, the human dropped down, silent as a ghost. Zyra barely had time to react. He struck fast, not with brute force, but with precision. His fist connected with her ribs, knocking the air from her lungs. Before she could counter, he rolled away, disappearing into the shadows. Zyra gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stay calm. He was fast, smarter than she expected, but she was still stronger. Her eyes darted to the spear embedded in the tree. A distraction. Which meant, "Behind you." She spun just as he lunged. This time, she was ready. Their bodies collided in a violent clash. Zyra locked her arm around his, twisting. He countered, shifting his weight, using her own momentum against her. They tumbled, hitting the ground hard, rolling through the dirt and leaves. For a brief moment, their faces were inches apart. His breath was steady, controlled. His eyes, sharp and focused, held no fear. A predator's eyes. Zyra smirked. "You're not afraid of me, are you?" The human didn't respond. Instead, he pushed off, flipping backward, landing smoothly on his feet. He gave her a single glance, calculating, curious, before vanishing into the jungle once more. Zyra lay there for a moment, staring at the canopy above. Then, for the first time in years, she laughed. This was going to be fun. A hunt unlike any other. Hours passed, but Zyra did not rest. She followed his trail, but every time she thought she had him cornered, he slipped away. He was toying with her, testing her. She realized something important. This was not just a fight. This was a hunt, and she was not the only hunter. She had underestimated him once. She would not make the same mistake again. As the sun began to set, she found something strange. Carvings on a rock. Symbols. Her visor translated them instantly. "Hunt me if you can." Zyra tilted her head, reading the words again. She had spent her entire life believing humans were weak, that they had lost their place in the galaxy. But this human, he was different, and for the first time in a long time, Zyra felt something new. Not duty, not obedience. Excitement. The hunt was truly on. The game of survival. The jungle whispered secrets only the hunters could hear. The dense canopy above blocked the sun, turning the ground into a maze of shadows and deception. Zyra crouched low, her sharp eyes scanning the terrain. Every leaf, every stone, every broken twig told a story. She was listening, learning. The human, Reed, as she had begun calling him in her mind, was unlike any prey she had ever pursued. He did not run blindly. He did not panic. He played the game of survival like a master. And Sarah was beginning to understand something vital. She was not hunting him. He was hunting her, a predator in the shadows. Sarah had spent hours tracking him, yet every time she thought she had caught up, he was gone. No footprints, no broken branches, just silence. He moved like a ghost, vanishing into the jungle as if it were part of him. And then there were the traps. The first one had been crude but effective. A noose of vines meant to snap around her leg. She had noticed it just in time. The second, a sharpened stake hidden beneath a false layer of soft leaves, would have skewered her had she stepped a few inches to the right. The third had almost worked. She had been creeping along a rocky incline when the ground beneath her shifted. A snare. The moment she put her weight on it, the vines snapped up, wrapping around her ankle and yanking her off her feet. She twisted midair, grabbing for something, anything, to stop her fall. Her claws dug into the tree bark, and she swung herself upward, severing the trap's grip with a single slash. She landed gracefully, but her pride was bruised. Reed had planned that one carefully. He was testing her, watching her. She could almost hear his voice in her head. "How smart are you, alien? How fast?" Sarah grinned. This was a challenge she welcomed. She reached into her belt and pulled out a small metallic sphere. With a flick of her wrist, she activated it. The device floated into the air, scanning the environment with a soft hum. If her own senses couldn't find him, technology would. The sphere pulsed once, twice, then static. Zyra's eyes narrowed. A jammer. Reed was not only skilled in combat, but he knew how to disable alien tech. That complicated things. But it also intrigued her. What kind of human had survived for so long, alone, on this forgotten world? And more importantly, was he really alone? The forgotten ruins. As night fell, Sarah continued her hunt, but something else caught her attention. Half buried beneath vines and debris, she saw the remnants of an ancient structure. A building, human-made. Curious, she approached cautiously. The stone walls were weathered, cracked by time, but she could still see faint carvings along the surface. She reached out, tracing her fingers over the strange symbols. Her visor translated the worn-out words. "We will endure." Zyra felt a strange chill crawl up her spine. She stepped inside. Dust filled the air, disturbed only by her movements. The interior was simple, crude furniture, rusted tools, scattered belongings. It was a home. Or at least it had been. On one of the walls, she found something that made her pause. A collection of handprints. Small ones, large ones. A family. Zyra's pulse quickened. Had Reed once lived here? Had he lost them? Was that why he fought so fiercely? Something creaked behind her. She spun, blades drawn. But no one was there. The jungle had gone silent again. That same, eerie silence that told her she was being watched. Then, a whisper in the wind. Not words. Movement. A flicker of motion outside. Zyra rushed forward, leaping onto a broken ledge, scanning the darkness. For the first time, she saw him clearly. Reed stood on a fallen tree, his body poised, his expression unreadable. The moonlight highlighted his features, scared, rugged, but composed. He was not a man lost in madness. He was a warrior, a survivor. Their eyes met across the ruins. And then, he smiled. Not one of kindness, not one of mockery. A challenge. Then he turned and disappeared once more into the trees. A hunt that never ends. Zyra stood motionless for a long moment. This was not a battle of strength. This was a battle of patience, skill, and intelligence. Reed was not going to let himself be captured easily. He was not afraid of her. In fact, he wanted this game to continue. Zyra exhaled slowly, her lips curling into a smirk. Good. She wasn't finished yet. She pressed a button on her wrist, sending a single message back to her ship. Delay extraction. The hunt continues. She would find him. She would face him. And in the end, one of them would win. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure which one of them it would be. A warrior's respect. The jungle had changed. It was no longer just a battlefield. It had become something more. A proving ground. A test of patience, skill, and instinct. For days, Thyra had pursued the human. But now she understood. She was not simply the hunter. She was being hunted. And she was beginning to respect the one hunting her. Reed was unlike any prey she had ever faced. His tactics were ruthless, yet precise. He did not attack without purpose. He did not strike without calculation. He was not reckless. He was deliberate. Every trap he set was more than just an attempt to kill. It was a lesson, a message. You are not invincible. You are not untouchable. You are being studied just as much as you study me. Thyra had fought elite warriors, monstrous creatures, and the deadliest assassins in the galaxy. But this was something entirely new. She no longer sought to simply eliminate him. She wanted to understand him. The dance of the hunters. Thyra crouched behind a fallen tree, scanning the moonlit jungle. Somewhere out there, Reed was watching, waiting. She knew better than to move recklessly. Instead, she reached into her belt and pulled out a small spherical drone. She activated it with a flick of her wrist, sending it forward. The tiny machine hovered silently, its sensors scanning the area ahead. Seconds passed. Then, a disturbance. A single arrow shot from the darkness, striking the drone in midair. Sparks erupted as it tumbled to the ground. Thyra's eyes narrowed. That was not a random attack. That was a warning. She did not react immediately. Instead, she remained still, listening. Her visor picked up the faintest sound of shifting leaves behind her. A second too late, she realized. It was a trap. She turned just as Reed lunged from the shadows. His movement was swift, controlled. He was close, closer than he had ever allowed himself to be before. For a moment, they locked eyes. Then the battle began. The first true fight. Reed struck first, a quick jab to her ribs, forcing her back. Thyra countered with a sweeping kick, but he dodged effortlessly, rolling to the side. He grabbed a fallen branch and swung it at her, aiming for her legs. She leaped back, barely avoiding the strike. For the first time, she was not fighting a mindless beast. She was fighting an equal. Thyra activated her energy blade, its blue light cutting through the darkness. But Reed was already moving, anticipating her attack. He threw a handful of dirt into her visor. Her vision blurred for half a second, long enough for him to strike. A powerful kick to her chest sent her crashing into a tree. Thyra growled, wiping her visor clean. When she looked up, Reed was already retreating, vanishing into the shadows once more. She could have chased him, could have forced another fight. But instead, she laughed. A low, amused chuckle that echoed through the trees. Reed had won this round, but the game was far from over. A warrior's code. The next morning, Thyra found something unexpected. A small bundle of fruit left carefully on a rock. A peace offering? No, not exactly. It was a message. You fought well. You survived. The hunt continues. Thyra took the fruit, examining it carefully. She did not need human food. Her armor supplied her with everything she required. But she appreciated the gesture. Instead of consuming it, she did something unexpected. She left behind one of her own ration packs, placing it in the same spot before disappearing into the jungle. It was not a surrender. It was an acknowledgement, a sign of respect. For the first time, she was not hunting to kill. She was hunting to learn, to understand, to see if humanity's last warrior was truly just a survivor or something greater. The ruins of the past. Days passed. The hunt continued, but it was no longer just about combat. Thyra found herself drawn to the remnants of human civilization scattered throughout the jungle. Ancient ruins, abandoned shelters, carvings that told stories of a forgotten time. She realized something troubling. Humans had not simply disappeared. They had been wiped out by the very empire she served. Her people had told her that humanity was dangerous, that they had been a threat to galactic peace. But standing in the remains of their world, Syra began to question everything. Reed was not a savage. He was not a monster. He was proof that her people had lied. And for the first time in her life, Syra wondered, was she on the wrong side of this hunt? A new threat approaches. The decision was taken from her. That evening, as she stood by the remains of an old human outpost, her communicator crackled to life. "Syra, report your status." It was Commander Vekren. She hesitated, just for a moment. Then, still tracking the target, a pause. Then, "Good. You won't be alone much longer. We are sending reinforcements." Zyra's blood ran cold. Reinforcements. They were coming to finish the hunt, to erase the last human from existence. She looked out into the jungle, where she knew Reed was watching. She had been sent to kill him. Now she had a choice to make. Would she obey her orders, or would she defy everything she had ever known, to stand beside the last warrior of a fallen race? The hunt takes a new turn. Zyra closed her eyes for a moment. Then she whispered the words she never thought she would say. "Run, human. They are coming for you." For the first time in her life, she was no longer a hunter. She was something more. And the war for survival had only just begun. The betrayal of the Huntress. The jungle was no longer a battlefield. It was a war zone. Zyra crouched on a high branch, her sharp eyes scanning the dense forest below. The night air was thick with the hum of alien machinery. Her people had arrived. The Galactic Dominion had sent an elite strike team. They weren't here to hunt. They were here to erase. She had always followed orders without question. But now, as she watched the silver ships land in a clearing far below, she felt something she had never known before: doubt. Somewhere in the shadows, Reed was watching too. He knew. He had heard the ships. He had felt the shift in the air. And he was waiting to see what she would do. Would she betray him, or would she betray everything she had ever known? For the first time in her life, Syra didn't know the answer. The arrival of death. The strike team moved with precision. 12 elite warriors, black armor, silent footsteps, weapons drawn. They didn't speak. They didn't hesitate. They were not here to track Reed. They were here to execute. Zyra recognized their leader instantly, Commander Vekren. Cold, efficient, unstoppable. He stepped forward, surveying the jungle with narrowed eyes. His voice was calm, emotionless. "Syra, report." She took a slow breath before answering. "The target is elusive." Vekren turned to face her, unreadable beneath his helmet. "Elusive," he repeated. She nodded. "He knows the terrain. He is skilled." A pause. "More skilled than we thought." Vekren considered this. Then you have failed." Zyra's muscles tensed, but she said nothing. The commander looked toward the jungle, then back at her. "It doesn't matter. We will burn this place to the ground. He cannot escape us." Zyra's heart pounded. They weren't just going to kill Reed. They were going to wipe out everything. Every ruin, every piece of history, every trace of humanity that still lingered. They were going to finish what they started centuries ago. And she was supposed to help them. A silent warning. Syra moved carefully, slipping away from the team under the cover of darkness. She had minutes, maybe less. She had to find him before they did. The jungle was eerily silent. No birds, no rustling leaves. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Then she heard it, a whisper of movement. She turned swiftly, her blade half drawn, only to meet Reed's gaze. He stood just a few feet away, half hidden in the shadows, his body poised like a predator ready to strike. His breath was calm, controlled. But his eyes were full of fire. "I heard them," he said quietly. "Your people." Syra's grip tightened on her weapon. She hesitated. Then, in a single motion, she sheathed it. Reed's gaze flickered with something unreadable. "You're not going to fight me." "No," she said. Then, in a voice lower than a whisper, "They are here to kill you." Reed's face didn't change. He had expected this. But there was something else in his expression, something that made Syra's stomach twist. He wasn't afraid. He was ready. "I know," he said simply. Syra stepped closer. "You don't understand. They will burn everything. They won't stop until you are dead." Reed exhaled slowly. "They've tried before." He turned away, scanning the jungle as if he were already planning his next move. "If I run, they'll follow." Syra shook her head. "You can't fight them all. Not this time." He gave her a sharp look. "Then why are you here?" She hesitated. The answer should have been simple. "Because I was ordered to be here. Because I was sent to kill you." But the words that left her lips were different. "Because I don't want you to die." Reed stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, a sound. A distant hum. The Dominion warriors were closing in. Reed's jaw clenched. "They've already found my trail." Syra had seconds to decide. She reached out, grabbing his wrist. "Come with me." Reed stiffened. "What?" She pulled him closer, urgency burning in her voice. "I can get you out, but you have to trust me." Reed searched her face, looking for the lie. He didn't find one. And for the first time, the last human in the galaxy trusted an alien. The betrayal begins. They moved swiftly through the jungle, slipping through the shadows like ghosts. Syra's mind raced. She had just committed treason. Everything she had been raised to believe. Her duty, her loyalty, her people. She had turned her back on all of it. For him. For the last remnant of a race that refused to die. She led Reed through the thick undergrowth, toward the one place she knew they would have a chance. Her ship. If they could reach it before Vecren's team did, she could get him off this planet. She could save him. They reached the clearing. The sleek, black shape of her ship was just ahead. Then, a voice. Cold, unforgiving. "Syra." She froze. Reed did too. From the darkness, Commander Vecren stepped forward, flanked by 6 heavily armed warriors. His gaze flickered from her to Reed. And in that moment, he understood everything. His voice was quiet, but deadly. "You are a traitor." Syra's fingers tightened around her weapon. She had made her choice. Now she would live, or die, by it. The fight for survival. Vecren raised his weapon. Syra moved first. A flash of steel. A blur of motion. She struck hard, fast, disarming one of the soldiers before he could react. Reed didn't hesitate. He grabbed the fallen warrior's rifle, flipping it in his hands, firing in one smooth motion. The jungle erupted into chaos. Syra and Reed moved as one, striking, dodging, fighting for their lives. She had trained her whole life to be the best warrior in the Dominion. But tonight, she fought for something else. Not for duty, not for honor. For him. For the last human. For the truth. And for the first time, she knew exactly who she was. Not a hunter. Not a soldier. A rebel. The battle was far from over. But Syra had already won the most important fight. The fight for her soul. The final stand. The jungle burned. Flames licked at the trees, turning the once dark canopy into a sea of fire. Smoke curled into the night sky, thick and choking, a cruel reminder that the hunt was over. The Galactic Dominion wasn't here to capture Reed anymore. They were here to destroy everything. Syra's lungs burned as she sprinted through the chaos, her body moving purely on instinct. Beside her, Reed ran silently, his expression unreadable even as death closed in from all sides. They had fought hard, but they had lost. Commander Vekran's forces were relentless. Syra had managed to take down 3 of his warriors, but it wasn't enough. They had numbers. They had firepower. They had her people's technology. And now, they had Reed. The moment she had turned her back for just a second, one of Vekran's soldiers had struck him down with a stun charge. Reed had fought to the last moment, his body still resisting even as electricity surged through his veins. But in the end, even he couldn't fight unconsciousness. Now he was being dragged away, shackled, barely breathing. And Syra stood frozen in place, her own people surrounding her, their weapons raised. She had chosen this path. She had betrayed the Dominion. And now she was paying the price. The cold voice of Commander Vekran cut through the night. Your fight is over, Syra. A choice in chains. Syra had never known fear. She had faced the worst horrors in the galaxy. She had hunted monsters, killed legends, and stood victorious over every battlefield she had ever walked. But now, as she kneeled in the mud, bound in shackles, she felt something unfamiliar creeping into her heart. Not fear of death. Fear of failing. Fear of knowing that, no matter how hard she fought, she might not be able to save Reed. He lay slumped on the ground nearby, his body still twitching from the stun charge. His face was bruised, blood trailing down the side of his jaw. And yet, even in chains, he looked defiant. Vekran stepped forward, his boots crushing the ash-covered ground beneath him. He stared at Reed, then at Syra, his expression cold. I expected better from you. His voice was quiet, disappointed. You were one of the best. You could have had anything. Power, honor, glory. Syra didn't answer. She had no words for him. Vekran tilted his head. And yet you threw it all away. For this. He kicked Reed's body hard, rolling him onto his back. Syra's jaw clenched. Reed groaned but didn't give Vekran the satisfaction of reacting. The commander crouched beside him, studying the beaten human as if he were some pathetic, broken creature. What is it about you? He mused. You are not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most advanced. You are nothing but a relic of a dead race. Reed, despite everything, smirked. Blood trickled down his lips as he spoke. And yet, I'm still here. Vekran's eyes darkened. Without hesitation, he pulled out his blade and pressed it against Reed's throat. Syra tensed against her restraints. Vekran didn't look at her as he spoke. The Dominion does not tolerate rebellion. He pressed the blade harder, a thin line of blood appearing beneath its edge. Then, finally, he turned to Syra. You have one last chance to prove where your loyalty lies. He pulled a second blade from his belt and tossed it at her feet. Kill him. The words hit harder than any weapon ever could. The jungle burned around them, but all Syra could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat. She had trained for this moment 1,000 times. Execution was a simple thing. Quick, clean, efficient. But as she stared at the weapon before her, she felt something she had never felt before. Revulsion. She thought of the ruins she had found, the words carved into stone, the handprints on the walls of abandoned homes, the last remnants of a race that refused to die. And she thought of Reed, the way he had fought, the way he had survived, not because he was the strongest, but because he was human, because he never gave up, because he never surrendered. Slowly, Syra looked up at Vekran, her hands curling into fists. And she made her choice, the turning of the Huntress. With a single, swift movement, Syra kicked the blade away. It landed in the dirt, untouched. A defiant silence filled the air. Vekran's gaze turned cold. His hand gripped his blade tighter. You disappoint me. Syra lifted her chin. Then you should have never trusted me to think for myself. For the first time, Vekran's expression shifted, not in anger, but in something close to amusement. Then, with an almost casual motion, he lifted his hand and fired. A bright surge of energy shot straight at her, a death sentence wrapped in blue light. But Sarah had been waiting for this. With lightning-fast reflexes, she twisted her body, using her shackled hands to deflect the blast. The energy grazed her armor, burning into the ground beside her. That was all she needed. Before Vecren could react, she lunged. A sharp, brutal movement. The force of her body slamming into him sent them both crashing to the ground. In one fluid motion, she grabbed the blade he had thrown at her earlier and drove it deep into his side. Vecren gasped, his eyes widening in shock. Blood spilled over Xyra's hands, hot and thick. She didn't hesitate. She ripped the blade free and turned, slicing through the restraints on her wrists in one motion. Chaos erupted. Blaster fire filled the air. Soldiers shouted. Reed moved, still sluggish from the stun charge, but alive. He rolled away, kicking a fallen weapon into his hands. Xyra was already on the offensive. Her body moved on instinct, slashing through the soldiers that tried to stop her. She was no longer a soldier, no longer a hunter. She was a traitor, and she welcomed it. Vecren fell to his knees, blood pooling beneath him. He tried to stand, but his body betrayed him. His eyes burned with hatred. "You are nothing now," he hissed. Xyra didn't even look at him. She grabbed Reed's arm, pulling him up. "We need to go. Now." Reed nodded, shaking off his exhaustion. They sprinted toward her ship, dodging fire from the remaining soldiers. The jungle blurred around them. The Dominion was closing in, but Xyra no longer cared. Xyra barely had time to react before he was gone, diving through the open hatch, free-falling toward the enemy ship. She wanted to scream, wanted to stop him, but she didn't, because she knew exactly what he was doing. Reed landed hard on the enemy ship's hull, his body slamming against the metal. The impact nearly threw him off, but he held on, gripping the edges of the wing. The Dominion pilot inside had no idea what was happening. Reed didn't give him time to figure it out. With one last breath, he raised his rifle and fired straight into the engine core. The fall and the rise. The explosion was blinding. Xyra watched in shock as the enemy ship erupted in flames, breaking apart midair. Reed was still on it. Her heart pounded as she saw him falling, tumbling through the sky, his body disappearing into the clouds. Without thinking, she dove the ship downward, pushing the thrusters to their limit. The ground was rushing up fast. She had seconds. Then she saw him. His body was limp, his limbs flailing, but he was alive. Xyra slammed the controls forward. The ship twisted beneath him, and at the last possible second, Reed crashed onto the hull. She had caught him. The end of the hunt. The battle was over. The Dominion forces were gone. Xyra and Reed sat in the cockpit, breathing hard, watching the planet shrink beneath them as they soared into open space. For the first time, Reed looked at her, really looked at her, and he smiled. Huntress smirked back. "So," she said, "what now?" Reed exhaled. "You tell me. You're the one who just betrayed your entire species." Xyra leaned back in her chair. "I prefer the word defected." Reed chuckled. "And what does a defected alien warrior do next?" She glanced at him, then at the endless stars beyond. "I think," she said slowly, "we find out what's left of humanity." Reed's smile faded into something softer, something real. Hope. Xyra reached forward, activating the ship's long-range scanners. Somewhere out there, in the vast unknown, there had to be more. More survivors, more fighters, more people who refused to be erased. The last human and the Huntress who defied her people. A new legend was just beginning. And this time, humanity would not fall. They would rise.